On my wedding night, as I bled in our bed, my husband smiled and said, "This is how you tame a woman." For years, I lived in silence until I discovered the secret that would destroy that man forever. Hello, my dears. It's so wonderful to be here chatting with you today. My name is Elizabeth Thompson Wilson. I'm 78 years old, and I live here in Williamsburg, Virginia, a beautiful little town full of history and good people. I was born in a small town called Oak Ridge in West Virginia, but fate brought me here many years ago, and I ended up putting down roots among these historic streets. These days, my greatest pleasure is taking care of my little antique furniture restoration workshop. Would you believe that these old, wrinkled hands still have the skill to bring life back to pieces that people no longer value? It's like therapy for me. I take those chairs, dressers, and tables that nobody wants anymore, all damaged by time, broken, and patiently, day after day, I sand, glue, varnish, until they shine like new again. I started this work after my children were grown. A neighbor had an old rocking chair that belonged to her grandmother. It was completely broken down, and everyone said it would be easier to throw it away and buy a new one. But I knew the sentimental value of that piece. I asked her to let me try, even though I'd never done anything like it before. I spent weeks studying, watching videos, asking advice from old Mr. Johnson at the carpenter's shop. When I delivered the restored chair, my neighbor cried with emotion. From there, word spread, and one piece led to another. I'm here in my little corner now, surrounded by tools, sandpaper, varnishes, and pieces of wood. I'm finishing a coffee table for Mrs. Patterson. It belonged to her great-grandmother, can you imagine? This little table is over 100 years old. People bring me not just furniture, but entire family histories. Before I continue with my story, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying listening to me, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this grandma keep sharing her stories with more people. And tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or late in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. You know, while I restore these pieces of furniture, I often think about my own story. How life also broke me, hurt me, but also restored me. Today, I want to share with you a difficult part of my life, something I've kept for many years. About a marriage that wasn't for love, about pain, about bitter discoveries, but also about how I found the strength to rise again. Because just like these old pieces of furniture, we too can be reborn from our wounds. I was born in Oak Ridge, West Virginia in 1947, in a simple house with a tin roof at the foot of the mountains. My father, Arthur Thompson, was a quiet man who worked in the coal mines, always coming home with his face stained with black dust, looking like one of those mountain spirits from old folklore. My mother, Eleanor Wilson, was a seamstress who insisted on keeping up appearances. "We may be poor, but we have to be clean and proper," she always said. There were 4 of us children. Me, the oldest, then came Ernest, Claire, and little Jimmy, whom God took when he was still small with yellow fever. Our house was simple, but full of life. The yard was large, with a cherry tree that gave the sweetest fruit in the region, a chicken coop where I helped collect eggs every morning, and a crystal-clear creek that ran at the back. How we played in that creek. We made little boats out of bark and raced them to see which would reach the bend faster. My father said that creek was blessed, that its waters came straight from the sacred mountains of the ancients. I woke up early, even before the rooster crowed. I helped my mother light the wood stove, where she prepared delicious cornbread with fried eggs and fresh brewed coffee. Afterward, I went to Oak Ridge Elementary School, carrying my notebooks wrapped in brown paper, because a backpack was a luxury we didn't know. On my way back, I still found time to play hopscotch with my friends Zelda and Teresa, daughters of Mr. O'Malley, who owned the general store. My mother had big dreams. Unlike most women of that time, she could read and write well, having studied through what they called junior high. She always said, "Education is the only thing no one can take away from you, my daughter." But behind that beautiful speech, I perceived something else. Mother had a thirst for social advancement that not all the coal in West Virginia could satisfy. She observed the women she sewed for with a mixture of admiration and envy. She wanted the same jewelry, the same dresses, the same life. When I was about 10, I began to notice how Mother dressed me differently when visitors came, especially if they had sons. She forced me to wear starched dresses that itched my skin, tied my hair so tight that I got headaches. "Straighten that posture, girl. Smile more, but don't show all your teeth. That's vulgar," she would whisper through clenched teeth while squeezing my hand. The worst was when Dr. Allendale arrived, the town doctor, with his son Clementine, a chubby boy with red cheeks, who always looked at me in a way that gave me chills. "Don't be silly, Elizabeth," Mother would say after they left. "Clementine is going to be a doctor like his father. He's a good catch." My father noticed what was happening, but rarely interfered. Once, however, I overheard an argument between them. "Eleanor, the girl is still a child. Let her live her childhood," my father argued. "A child? She's becoming a young lady. If you don't prepare the ground early, she'll end up like Sebastiana's daughter, married to that drunk who doesn't have a penny to his name," my mother responded, with that cutting voice that didn't admit any argument. It was around this time that I noticed a change in my mother's gaze. It was no longer the look of a mother to a daughter, but of someone evaluating merchandise. She began to constantly talk about good matches, making a good marriage, securing the future. My little girl's body was beginning to show the first signs of change, and I felt as if I were in a showcase, waiting for the highest bidder. At 12, something happened that deeply marked my life. One May afternoon, during the spring festival in Oak Ridge, Mother dressed me in a light blue dress all embroidered, which she made herself, and took me to the town square. "Important people from the capital are here today," she whispered, adjusting my hair for the 1,000th time. That's when I saw him for the first time. Gerald Bradford Montgomery, a rancher from Williamsburg, a middle-aged man who looked at me with those eyes. Oh my goodness, I still get chills remembering. Eyes that undressed me, that devoured me, that reduced me to nothing. That night, I heard Mother enthusiastically telling Father, "Did you see how Mr. Montgomery looked at our Elizabeth? A man of means, landowner in Williamsburg, widowed and childless. Imagine the opportunity." My father replied something I couldn't understand, his voice muffled by the door. But I didn't need to hear to know that once again he wouldn't have the strength to stand up to my mother. From that day on, the name of Gerald Bradford Montgomery began to be mentioned frequently in our house. And I, a girl who still played with dolls in secret so as not to be scolded for childishness, felt a growing fear, a presentiment that made my heart tighten every time that name was spoken. The years passed, but Gerald Bradford Montgomery's name never left our house. Every few months, he would appear in Oak Ridge on business and always managed to pay us a visit. He brought expensive gifts, fine fabrics for my mother, imported cigars for my father, and for me, delicate jewelry that Mother kept in a small box, saying I could only wear them at the right time. When I turned 15 in 1962, Mother organized a modest party, but she went all out on my dress. She sewed day and night a pink satin model with lace at the hem. Of course, Gerald was invited. That night, while everyone was dancing in the living room, he asked to speak to me alone on the porch. My heart raced with fear, but Mother pushed me outside with a forced smile. "Elizabeth, you're becoming a beautiful young lady," he said, his breath heavy with tobacco and whiskey. "You know, on my ranch in Williamsburg, I have everything a woman could desire. Big house, servants, jewelry. All that's missing is a lady to run it all." His large, calloused hands gripped my wrist tightly, while his eyes ran up and down my body. "Soon I'll talk to your father about us." I went back inside, trembling. I found my mother in the kitchen and between sobs told her what had happened. I expected consolation, protection. I received only a cold, calculating look. And what's the problem? Gerald is a man of means, respected. He can give you a life that I never had, that your father could never give me. But mother, he's old enough to be my father. And I don't like him. He looks at me in a way that... I couldn't finish the sentence. The slap came quick and sure. Don't be ungrateful. Do you think marriage is like love stories? It's an agreement, a business. If you want to live on love, you'll end up starving. Is that what you want? Her eyes gleamed with anger. Besides, he's an experienced man. He knows how to treat a woman. He's not like those silly boys your age. That night, I cried myself to sleep. In the months that followed, Gerald's presence became more frequent and more threatening. On one of his visits, he brought a different gift, a small portrait of himself, which Mother insisted I place at my bedside. For you to get used to the idea, she said, in that tone that didn't allow for discussion. My father, always so quiet, one night came into my room. He sat on the edge of the bed and was silent for a long time. Daughter, he finally began, his voice as low as ever. I know your mother is pushing this marriage. If you don't want... He didn't complete the sentence. He squeezed my hand and left, leaving in the air a vague promise of protection that, deep down, we both knew he couldn't keep. A week later, I found my father crying in the yard, hidden behind the chicken coop. Dad, what happened? I asked, frightened. He quickly wiped away his tears. Nothing, daughter, I'm just tired. But his eyes told another story. Years later, I discovered that that same week, Gerald had generously paid off all the debts my father had accumulated at the mine, after an accident had left him off work for months. Shortly before turning 17, the inevitable happened. On a stifling January night, Gerald came to dinner at our house with a notary. Between the chicken and dumplings and the apple pie dessert, he officially asked for my hand. My mother smiled like she had never smiled before. My father stared fixedly at the empty plate. My siblings were uncomfortably silent. And me? I was petrified, as if my soul had left my body and was observing everything from a distance. I'm building a new house in Williamsburg, especially to receive my young wife, announced Gerald, helping himself to another glass of whiskey. It will have all the comfort that a fine young lady like Elizabeth deserves. That night, I tried one last time. I knelt at my mother's feet, begged, cried. Don't force me to do this, Mother. I'm afraid of him. She lifted me forcefully, her eyes hard as stones. It's your chance to have a good life. Learn to please him. That's what I did with your father. It's what all women do. But what does that mean, Mother? What happens after the wedding? I asked, genuinely not understanding what awaited me. She lowered her voice. He's a vigorous man. Everyone in Williamsburg knows that. He brags about his attributes. She paused. It will hurt at first. We all go through it, but you get used to it, and then come the children, and the pain has a purpose. The wedding was set for April 1964. Gerald wanted an ostentatious ceremony to show everyone his prize. In the 3 months of engagement, he visited our house frequently, bringing fabrics for my dress, trousseau, furniture for the new house. With each visit, he became more possessive, more controlling. When you're my wife, you won't wear that lipstick. You look like a loose woman. Or, that loose hair isn't for a respectable lady. In town, people commented. Some envied my luck in marrying a rich man. Others looked with pity, knowing the rumors about Gerald's temperament. My friend Teresa, the only one who dared to speak openly, warned me. They say his first wife died under strange circumstances, Lizzie. Be careful. When I tried to ask my mother about this, she cut off the subject. Gossip from envious people. His wife died in childbirth. It happens all the time. The wedding day arrived like a death sentence. The church was decorated with white lilies, which reminded me of funeral arrangements. My dress, although expensive and elegant, weighed like armor. Gerald, at the altar, displayed a triumphant smile. Throughout the ceremony, I felt as if I was being sold, delivered, sacrificed. At the reception, held at Gerald's ranch on the outskirts of Williamsburg, where we immediately moved, he made a point of showing off his young wife to all the guests. "Look at this wildflower I found in Oak Ridge," he would say, gripping my waist with unnecessary force. Among the guests, a group of older men, friends of his, exchanged looks and complicit smiles that made me even more terrified. As the night progressed, Gerald drank more and more. His eyes became glazed, his voice louder, his gestures more abrupt. Near midnight, he announced in a loud and clear voice, "It's time to take my little bride to learn what a real man is." A round of coarse laughter followed the announcement. My mother took me to the bridal suite, helped me change from the wedding dress to a white silk nightgown. Her last words before leaving me were, "Close your eyes and think about the family you'll build. The pain passes, the money stays." I was left alone in that huge room, sitting on the edge of the bed, trembling like a leaf in the wind. The laughter and music from the party still echoed in the distance, but they seemed to belong to another world. The world I knew, imperfect as it was, had ended, and what would come next was a complete mystery that filled me with dread. I don't know how long I sat on the edge of that bed, listening to the sounds of the party diminish outside. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed suspended, as if the world was holding its breath along with me. When the door finally opened, the strong smell of whiskey and cigars invaded the room even before Gerald entered. He staggered slightly, his tie loose around his neck, the first buttons of his shirt already open. He locked the door behind him and looked at me in a way I will never forget, a mixture of triumph and hunger that made me shrink even more. "So my little wildflower is finally mine," he said, his voice slurred from alcohol. "You know, all those men down there are jealous of me now. They know what I'll have tonight." He approached, unbuttoning the rest of his shirt. "Prepare to meet a real man." What happened that night? It wasn't love. It wasn't union. It was brute force. Every time I close my eyes, I can still feel that crushing weight on me. Hear my own screams muffled by the pillow he pressed against my face so that no one would hear the crying of a spoiled girl. When it finally ended, he turned to his side and fell asleep almost instantly, snoring loudly. I remained motionless, feeling the throbbing pain course through my entire body, the sheet, once white as snow, now stained with red, a silent witness to my suffering. The next morning, I could hardly walk. As I got ready in the bathroom, looking at the purple marks that were beginning to appear on my arms, I heard knocks on the bedroom door. It was my mother, who had stayed at the ranch to help me get settled. "So, daughter, how was it?" she asked, entering the room without waiting for an answer. Her eyes ran over my swollen face from so much crying, my cautious walk, the stained sheets. For a brief moment, I saw something in her eyes. Guilt, perhaps? But it passed too quickly. "That's just how it is the first time," she said, helping me change the sheets. "Get used to it. Big men are like that. At least he's rich." Those words sealed my loneliness. I understood that I was completely alone in that particular hell. In the days that followed, I learned the routine of the ranch. Gerald maintained dozens of employees, working with the cattle in the fields, in the big house. But no one looked me in the eye. The women especially averted their gaze when they saw me, as if my situation was contagious. Only Martha, the oldest cook, dared to direct words of comfort to me when we were alone. "Miss needs to be strong," she whispered, as she served me chamomile tea on mornings when I could barely get out of bed. "All the women in this house have suffered, the former mistress too." Little by little, I began to piece together the story of Gerald's first wife. Her name was Eunice, daughter of a tobacco merchant from Richmond. They married when she was 20, and for 7 years they tried to have children without success. Gerald blamed her publicly, humiliating her at social events, calling her a barren mule. When she finally became pregnant, after painful and humiliating treatments, Eunice died during childbirth. The baby also didn't survive. The doctors said she was too fragile, Martha told me one afternoon, as we prepared preserves. But those of us who lived here knew the truth. She couldn't take it anymore. Her body gave up after so much suffering. My life as Mrs. Montgomery followed a predictable and terrifying pattern. During the day, I managed the house, always under Gerald's watchful eye, who criticized every decision of mine. At night, he demanded his marital rights with the same brutality as the first time. "It's to widen you," he would say with a sadistic smile when I cried in pain. "A woman needs to be ready to birth my son." Gerald's obsession with having an heir soon became evident. Each month, when my bleeding came, his anger increased. "Are you useless like the other one too?" he would shout, throwing objects around the house. "Maybe the problem is with these modern women, too weak to carry a real child." After 6 months of marriage, he began taking me to doctors in Richmond. I was subjected to invasive and painful examinations, always with Gerald present in the room, discussing my body as if talking about a breeding mare. "She seems normal on the outside, doctor, but something doesn't work right in there," he would say without any shame. All the doctors said the same thing. There was nothing wrong with me. I was young, healthy, perfectly capable of conceiving. An older doctor, Dr. Mitchell, even discreetly suggested that Gerald should also be examined. The reaction was explosive. "Are you questioning my masculinity?" he bellowed, grabbing the doctor by the lapel. "Anyone in Williamsburg can attest to what I have between my legs. The problem is with her, for sure." We left the office in a hurry, with Gerald dragging me by the arm. In the car, his silence was more terrifying than his shouts. When we arrived at the ranch, he locked me in the room for 2 days, without food, only water that Martha managed to pass to me in secret. My isolation increased every day. I couldn't write to my family. All letters passed through Gerald's scrutiny. The rare visits from my mother were supervised, with Gerald always present, showing off his happy wife and the prosperous home he had given me. Behind the forced smiles and expensive jewelry, I was withering like a flower without sun. In town, Gerald made a point of showing me off at social events, always introducing me as my young and beautiful wife. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple, the respected rancher and his elegant wife. No one saw the marks under the long-sleeved dresses. No one heard my muffled screams during the night. Over time, I learned to disconnect, to let my mind wander far away while my body endured the unbearable. I imagined myself back in Oak Ridge, running by the creek, climbing the cherry tree. Or I projected myself into a future where I would be free, where I would have a voice, where I would not be anyone's property. On our first wedding anniversary, Gerald organized a big party at the ranch. He invited all of Williamsburg society, my family, his rancher friends. He had a very expensive emerald green dress made for me, imported from New York City. "To hide that sickly thinness of yours," he commented. "People will think I don't feed you properly." During the party, I smiled mechanically, accepted congratulations, danced when requested. My mother, dazzled by the luxury, didn't stop praising Gerald, commenting on how I had moved up in life. My father, increasingly aged, just hugged me for a long time without saying a word. In his eyes, I saw that he knew, or at least suspected, the truth behind the facade. It was that night, when everyone had already left and Gerald was too drunk to look for me, that I found a small moment of peace on the back porch. Looking at the stars, so bright in the dark sky of the countryside, I promised myself that I would not die on that ranch. I would not end up like Eunice, a name whispered in corners, a sad story that no one had the courage to tell openly. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I would find a way out. There had to be a way to escape that nightmare. And as long as that possibility, however remote, existed, I would continue breathing, continue enduring, continue living. The second year of my marriage to Gerald was even more suffocating than the first. His obsession with an heir transformed into paranoia. I was forced to follow a rigorous diet elaborated by a healer he brought from a distant Appalachian community. I drank bitter teas 3 times a day, took herbal baths that burned my skin, and had to sleep in specific positions after his nightly visits. One afternoon, while Gerald was in town, I found Martha crying in the kitchen. The old cook rarely showed emotion, so I approached, concerned. "What's wrong, Martha?" She quickly wiped away her tears. "Nothing, miss. It's just my rheumatism." But when I insisted, she finally confessed. "It's been 10 years today since Miss Eunice passed." That aroused my curiosity. "You liked her very much, didn't you?" Martha looked around, making sure we were alone. "She was an angel on earth, miss. She suffered as much in his hands as you do, perhaps more. In the last months, when she finally managed to get pregnant, he seemed calmer. But what, Martha?" She hesitated. "There are things it's better not to know, miss." That night, I couldn't sleep. Martha's unfinished words hammered in my head. What did she know? What else was there to know about Eunice and her tragic end? The next morning, taking advantage of Gerald having gone to a cattle auction in Lynchburg and wouldn't return for 3 days, I began to search his quarters, something I would never have the courage to do if he were nearby. In the office, rummaging through old papers, I found a locked metal box. Using a hairpin, as I had learned from my brother Ernest in childhood, I managed to open it after several attempts. Inside, there were documents, photographs, and letters. Letters written by Eunice to her sister in Richmond, letters that obviously were never sent. With trembling hands, I began to read them. Each word was like a mirror of my own suffering. He accuses me of being barren, but refuses to consult a doctor himself. When I suggested that perhaps the problem was with him, he threw me against the wall with such force that I fainted. The last doctor suggested a procedure to unblock my tubes. The pain was indescribable, but Gerald insisted that I take nothing to relieve it, saying that the pain would make me stronger for childbirth. I'm finally pregnant, but I'm so afraid, not for the birth, but because I don't know if I want to bring a child into this hell. What if it's a boy who becomes like his father? What if it's a girl condemned to suffer like me? The last letter, dated just a week before her death, froze my blood. "Dear sister, if something happens to me, please investigate. The family doctor is in Gerald's pocket. He says my pregnancy is progressing normally, but I feel that something is wrong. I have strange pains, bleeding. When I mention it, Gerald says it's nonsense, that I want attention. The tea he insists I drink every night has a strange taste. Yesterday I threw it away when he wasn't looking, and I spent the night without pain for the first time in weeks." I dropped the letters, horrified. What was Eunice insinuating? Could it be possible that Gerald— No, it was unthinkable. Even someone so cruel wouldn't do that to his own wife, to his own child. I continued searching in the box and found at the bottom a sealed envelope addressed to Gerald. The seal of Virginia Medical Center in Richmond indicated something official. I opened it carefully so as not to tear it, so that I could seal it again without him noticing. It was a medical report dated 1955, about 2 years before his marriage to Eunice. The document was full of technical terms, but one phrase jumped out at me, clear as day. Confirming complete and irreversible sterility due to complications from bilateral orchitis resulting from mumps in childhood. My heart raced. Gerald was sterile, completely sterile, always was. He could never have children, and he knew this even before marrying Eunice, before marrying me. All the cruelty, all the accusations, all the humiliating treatments to which we were both subjected, all based on a lie. A lie to protect his male pride, his reputation as a virile man of which he boasted so much. As I digested this shocking revelation, I heard the sound of horses approaching. Quickly, I put everything back in the box, except for a copy of the medical report that I hid inside my bodice. I closed the box, put it back in place, and left the office, my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode. From the window, I saw Gerald dismounting from his horse. He had returned earlier than expected. My mind was working frantically. What to do with that information? If I confronted him directly, he would certainly deny everything, and then... I didn't even want to think about what would happen after. I needed a plan. That night, while serving dinner to Gerald, he seemed especially irritated. The auction was a waste of time. Those hicks don't know anything about quality cattle. He took another sip of whiskey. Any news around here? Nothing, sir. Just the usual routine. He looked at me suspiciously. You're acting strange. What are you hiding? Nothing, sir, I swear. I tried to appear as natural as possible, but my hands trembled slightly. Gerald suddenly stood up, knocking over the chair. You're lying. I can see it in your eyes. He grabbed my arm so hard that I let out a scream. What did you do while I was away? Who was here? No one, sir, I swear. Tears began to stream down my face. Maybe you need a reminder about who's in charge here. He dragged me to the bedroom, throwing me on the bed. What followed was the worst night since our wedding. The discovery of his secret seemed to have made him even more brutal, as if somehow he knew that I knew, or as if he was taking out on me the frustration of his condition that he tried so hard to hide. When he finally fell asleep, I could barely move. Every inch of my body hurt, but the physical pain was almost welcome, as it helped distract from the pain in my soul. Looking at his face in the dark, so serene in sleep despite the monstrosity it harbored, I made my decision. I wouldn't end up like Eunice. I wouldn't die on that ranch, a victim of the cruelty of a man whose greatest concern was hiding his own inadequacy. The next morning, when Gerald went out to inspect the ranch, I dragged myself to the kitchen. Martha let out a horrified sigh when she saw my condition. My Lord in heaven! What did he do to you, miss? Martha, my voice was just a whisper. I need your help. The old cook looked around, nervous. Miss, I can't. If he finds out. Please, I begged, for Eunice. At the mention of the former mistress's name, I saw resolution form in Martha's eyes. What do you need? First, tell me everything about Eunice, everything you know, and then... I need to find a way to get out of here. Not to run away, I quickly added, seeing the panic in her eyes, but to prepare something. During the following hours, Martha told me dark details about Eunice's final years. How she too had found the medical report, how she had confronted Gerald, and how after that her health had mysteriously begun to deteriorate. How the teas he insisted she drink to strengthen the baby coincided with her worst episodes of bleeding. How the family doctor, completely under Gerald's influence, ignored all signs that something was wrong. She died with the baby still in her womb, concluded Martha, silent tears running down her wrinkled face. The doctor said it was eclampsia, but we in the house knew. We knew there was something wrong with those teas. When she finished her account, I asked, "Why did you never report this? Why did you keep working for him after everything?" Martha lowered her eyes. My whole family works on his land, miss. My grandchildren, my nephews. He would destroy us all. And who would believe? The word of a black cook against one of the most powerful men in Williamsburg. I understood perfectly. Gerald's power extended far beyond the walls of that ranch. But I had one thing that Eunice didn't have: physical proof of his condition. And more importantly, I had time. Gerald didn't suspect that I knew his deepest secret. In the weeks that followed, I began to plan carefully. With Martha's discreet help, I managed to send a letter to my brother Ernest, who now worked in Richmond. I didn't tell everything, just enough for him to understand the gravity of the situation. I asked him to discreetly investigate Gerald's medical past and, if possible, the case of Eunice's death. Each day was torture, pretending normalcy while carrying the knowledge that could destroy everything Gerald most prized: his public image as a virile, potent man capable of generating a legacy. At social events, when he boasted to his friends about soon having an heir for the Montgomery lands, I smiled docilely, while inside I boiled with rage and disgust. 3 months after the discovery of the report, I finally received a coded response from Ernest, hidden inside a cake he sent as a belated birthday present. He had managed to confirm Gerald's medical condition with a former hospital assistant. More alarmingly, he had discovered rumors about Eunice's death that corroborated my suspicions. The doctor who had certified the cause of death had received a piece of land from Gerald a few months later. It was all I needed to know. My decision was made. I wouldn't flee like a criminal. I wouldn't disappear in the dead of night. I would destroy him, just as he had tried to destroy me, using the only weapon he truly feared: the truth. The opportunity I had been waiting for came faster than I imagined. Every year, in May, Gerald organized the Grand Harvest Festival at his ranch. It was the most important event on Williamsburg's social calendar, when ranchers, politicians, merchants, and their families gathered to celebrate the prosperity of the Montgomery lands. For Gerald, it was the perfect moment to display his power, his wealth, and, of course, his young wife. Preparations began a month before. Gerald personally supervised every detail, from the menu to the decoration. "This year will be even bigger," he announced during dinner. "The governor has confirmed his attendance, and the bishop too." His eyes gleamed with the prospect of impressing such important figures. For me, he had specific orders. "I want you dazzling. Have the most expensive dress made that you can find in Richmond. Everyone should envy what is mine." The way he spoke of me, as property, once deeply hurt me. Now, it only fueled my resolution. As the party approached, I carefully refined my plan. I needed copies of the medical report, enough to distribute among the most influential guests. With Martha's discreet help, I managed to send the original document to my brother in Richmond, who made several copies and returned them hidden inside cans of homemade preserves, supposedly sent by our mother. The week before the party was one of frantic activity at the ranch. Extra cooks were hired, decorators came from the capital, musicians rehearsed in the great hall. Gerald walked around the property like a peacock, displaying his feathers for anyone willing to admire him. "This year I have a special announcement to make," he commented to one of his foremen, loud enough for me to hear from the porch. "I think Mrs. Montgomery is finally expecting my heir." I froze upon hearing those words. It was a lie, of course. I knew it was impossible. But what was he intending with that? Was it just another of his fantasies to keep up appearances, or something more sinister? I thought of Eunice, of her mysterious pregnancy that ended in tragedy. A chill ran down my spine. On the eve of the party, I received an unexpected visit. My brother Ernest, whom I hadn't seen since my wedding, arrived at the ranch with a gift for the grand event. Gerald, always suspicious of my family, observed our interaction closely, but could not refuse entry to a brother-in-law who came to pay his respects. "Are you all right?" whispered Ernest, when we managed a brief moment alone as I took him to see the gardens. "No," I replied simply. "But tomorrow everything will change." "I'm afraid for you, Lizzie," he said, using the childhood nickname I hadn't heard in so long. "This man is dangerous. The rumors in Richmond—" "I know exactly how dangerous he is," I interrupted. "That's why I need to do this. Not just for me, but for Eunice too." Ernest discreetly squeezed my hand. "I brought what you asked for, and more. I managed to contact Eunice's brother in Richmond. He'll come to the party tomorrow, although Gerald doesn't know it. You'll have someone by your side when everything happens." That night was the longest of my life. Lying beside the man who had destroyed my youth, I planned every word I would say, every gesture I would make. There could be no mistakes. This would be my only chance. The day of the party dawned clear and bright, as if heaven itself approved of my plan. I spent the entire morning preparing, not just physically, but mentally. The dress that Gerald had ordered was a deep emerald green with details in gold lace, the colors of the Montgomery lands. Symbolic, I thought with irony, that I would use his colors to destroy him. The guests began to arrive in the middle of the afternoon. The elite of Williamsburg and surroundings, all in their best clothes, bringing expensive gifts and fake smiles. Gerald kept me by his side like a trophy, introducing me to each newcomer with possessive pride. "My Elizabeth is radiant today, don't you think?" he would say repeatedly. "Perhaps it's a special glow of someone carrying a new life." The curious looks and polite smiles that followed this comment made me boil inside, but I kept my expression serene and modest. When the governor arrived, accompanied by his wife and advisors, Gerald practically abandoned me to give total attention to the highest authority in the state. It was the moment I took advantage of to discreetly meet my brother, who handed me a small package. "Are you sure about this, Lizzie?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," I answered, storing the package in the hidden pocket of my dress. The party was in full swing when Gerald asked for silence to make his annual speech. At my side, he raised a glass of imported champagne and began to talk about the prosperity of the ranch, about God's blessings, about the strength of the Montgomery family. "As you know, my friends, a family needs strong roots and abundant fruits to prosper," he said, his voice resounding through the hall. "That's why it's with immense joy that I would like to announce that soon we'll have a new member in the Montgomery family. My wife, Elizabeth, is expecting our first child." A buzz of applause and congratulations filled the environment. Smiles, pats on the back, glasses raised in a toast. I remained motionless, my smile frozen, while inside a volcano was erupting. It was now or never. "Would my husband like me to say a few words?" I asked docilely, extending my hand for the microphone. Gerald hesitated for a moment. I rarely spoke in public, but then smiled condescendingly. "Of course, my dear. Everyone would like to hear from the future mother of the Montgomery heir." I took the microphone and took a deep breath. The entire room was silent. All eyes turned to me. From the corner, I saw my brother Ernest, and at his side, a man I recognized from photos I had seen. Arthur, Eunice's brother. Both nodded discreetly, giving me courage. "First, I would like to thank all of you for your presence at this special party," I began, my voice surprisingly firm. "It truly is a day of important revelations." Gerald smiled at my side, clearly satisfied with my apparent docility. "My husband has just announced that I'm expecting a child, the heir to the Montgomery lands," I continued, feeling Gerald's gaze on me, increasingly suspicious of my tone. "But there is a problem with this story." A heavy silence fell over the hall. I saw Gerald's smile falter. "The problem," I continued, opening my purse and removing copies of the medical report, "is that my husband, the powerful Gerald Bradford Montgomery, has been completely sterile since his youth." I handed the first copies to the closest people, who looked at them with astonishment and began to pass them on. "This is a medical report from Virginia Medical Center from 1955, confirming complete and irreversible sterility due to complications from mumps in childhood. My husband has always known that he could never father a child." Gerald's face completely transformed. Red rose to his face, his eyes widened with fury and humiliation. He tried to snatch the microphone from my hand, but I quickly moved away. "This man," I continued, my voice now louder, amplified by the anger contained for so long, "not only lied to me, but also to his first wife, Eunice. He tortured her for years, accusing her of being barren, subjecting her to painful and humiliating treatments, and when she finally became pregnant—" "Shut up!" roared Gerald, advancing in my direction. But it was too late. Copies of the report circulated around the room, and I saw the exact moment when they reached the hands of the governor and the bishop. I also saw Arthur, Eunice's brother, approaching with a determined look. "When she finally became pregnant," I repeated, my voice trembling but determined, "something happened. something that caused her and the baby to die, something that perhaps had to do with the teas he insisted she drink every night. A horrified murmur ran through the crowd. I saw some of the older ladies who had known Eunice bring their hands to their mouths in shock. Gerald's face was a mask of fury and panic. "Elizabeth, you've gone mad!" he shouted, trying to take control of the situation. "This is absurd, a slander! Someone take that microphone from her!" No one moved. Everyone looked between me, Gerald, and the copies of the report that now circulated from hand to hand. "I'm not crazy, Gerald," I responded calmly. "I'm just tired of living in silence. Tired of suffering for your lie, for your sick pride. And I'm sure I'm not the only one." At that moment, Arthur stepped forward. "My sister Eunice also suffered at the hands of this man," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I always suspected that her death was not natural. Now, I'm certain." Gerald looked frantically around, like a cornered animal. "This is a conspiracy. You're all against me. That document is fake, fabricated by enemies who envy my lands." Dr. Anderson, a respected doctor from Richmond who was among the guests, took one of the copies and examined it carefully. "This document seems authentic, Gerald," he said gravely. "The format, the letterhead, Dr. Kavanaugh's signature, everything corresponds to the standards of Virginia Medical Center from that time." "It's a lie!" bellowed Gerald, knocking over a nearby table. Glasses and plates shattered on the floor. The governor, visibly embarrassed, made a gesture to his advisors and began to discreetly withdraw. Other guests followed his example, moving away from Gerald as if his shame was contagious. I felt my brother Ernest's hand on my shoulder, giving me silent support. Gerald, realizing he was losing control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. "Elizabeth," he said, lowering his voice, trying to sound reasonable. "Let's talk about this in private, dear. You're confused, embarrassing yourself and me in front of our friends." "I have nothing more to say in private, Gerald," I replied. "I've lived too long in the shadows, with fear, with shame. Now everyone knows who you really are. A man who built his reputation, his marriage, his entire life on a lie. A man who would rather see innocent women suffer than admit his own inadequacy." The word hung in the air like a sentence. For a man like Gerald, whose identity was so deeply tied to his supposed virility, it was the final blow. I saw something die in his eyes at that moment. Not the physical man, but everything he believed himself to be. Everything he had built, his reputation, his respect, his power over others, especially over me, everything crumbled like a house of cards. Without saying anything more, Gerald turned and staggered out of the hall, leaving behind the deafening silence of his public humiliation. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Aided by my brother and the lawyer he had secretly hired, I filed for an annulment of the marriage, citing fraud. Gerald had married me knowing of his condition, unable to fulfill the primary purpose of matrimony at that time, to bear children. Williamsburg society, once so subservient to Gerald, now avoided him like the plague. Rumors about the possibility of him having poisoned Eunice gained strength, especially after Arthur managed to exhume his sister's body for new toxicological exams. The results were not conclusive after so much time, but raised enough suspicions for a police investigation. Gerald's business began to crumble. His friends distanced themselves, business partners canceled contracts, banks refused new loans. In a few months, the great rancher was on the brink of ruin. As for me, with Ernest's legal support and Martha's testimony about the mistreatment I suffered during the marriage, I managed not only the annulment, but also a considerable portion of Gerald's assets as compensation. I didn't want his money. Much of it was donated to charities in Williamsburg. But I needed resources to rebuild my life. After the trial, I received an unexpected proposal. Arthur, Eunice's brother, had become my friend during those difficult months. He owned a small antique shop in the historic center of Williamsburg and offered me a partnership in the business. "You have a good eye for beauty and value," he said, "and I believe that staying in Williamsburg would be a way to show everyone that you won, that you don't need to run away." I accepted the offer. There was something liberating about remaining in the city where I had suffered so much, but now, as a free woman, respected mistress of my own destiny. Little by little, we transformed the small shop into a thriving business. I became known for my ability to restore antique pieces, returning life and beauty to objects that others would consider lost, irretrievable, a perfect metaphor for my own journey. As for Gerald, the proud rancher who once reigned over Williamsburg with his reputation as a virile and powerful man, ended his days as a shadow of what he was. After losing almost everything in legal proceedings and failed businesses, he took refuge in a small property on the outskirts of the city, living as a recluse, avoided even by former employees. One day, about 2 years after that fateful harvest festival, I learned from Martha, who still maintained contact with some people from the old ranch, that Gerald had suffered a stroke. Alone in his house, with no one to help him, he lay fallen for hours until found by a passing worker. I didn't feel joy at the news, but neither did I feel pity. Just a strange sensation that a cycle had closed, that justice, not revenge, had finally been done. My life moved forward. The antique shop prospered. I became a respected part of the community, and a few years later, I met Anthony, a widowed professor who came to Williamsburg to research colonial architecture. Our love blossomed slowly, built on mutual respect, honesty, and kindness, everything that was lacking in my first marriage. At 32, when I had already given up on the possibility, I discovered I was pregnant. Anthony cried with joy upon finding out, and 9 months later, we welcomed our son, David. Later, 2 more children came, Sarah and Michael, our little miracles, as Anthony called them. And so, through pain and courage, I found what Gerald, with all his power and possessions, never achieved: a true family built on love and truth. And here I am, at 78 years old, in this workshop full of antique furniture, waiting for a second chance. Each piece I restore reminds me a little of my own story. I see a chair with torn upholstery, scratched wood, and think, this one can still be fixed. Because I learned, my dears, that almost everything in life can be fixed if we have patience and the right tools. Williamsburg truly became my home over these decades. The cobblestone streets, the historic buildings, the colonial houses, all this now is part of who I am. My Anthony left 8 years ago after almost 50 years of marriage. It was a quiet love, without storms, one of those that grow like trees with deep roots, silently, firmly, giving shade and fruit. Our children followed their paths. David, the oldest, became a doctor and lives in Richmond. Sarah followed in her father's footsteps and is a history professor at the State University. Michael, our youngest, has a bed and breakfast right here in Williamsburg. All gave me wonderful grandchildren, 7 in total, who fill this house with joy when they come to visit. The antique shop transformed over the years. After Arthur passed away, about 20 years ago, I took over the business alone. Gradually, I specialized in restoring pieces rather than selling. I started almost by chance, fixing a rocking chair that no one else wanted. I discovered I had a talent for it, and more importantly, I discovered that it healed me inside. Each piece I restore tells me a story. This broken cabinet witnessed family dinners. This worn dresser stored baby clothes of infants who are now adults. This dressing table with the cracked mirror reflected the faces of brides on the happiest day of their lives. I restore to them not just physical beauty, but also dignity, the possibility of continuing to be useful, of carrying their stories forward. Many people in Williamsburg know me as Miss Elizabeth the Restorer. The younger ones have no idea about my history with Gerald. The older ones, who might remember, respectfully avoid touching on the subject, and that's fine with me. I no longer carry that past as a burden, but as a part of my story that shaped me, that taught me to value truth, freedom, and genuine love. My routine today is peaceful and filled with small joys. I wake up early, have my coffee watching the birds in the yard. Then I come to the workshop and work on my pieces until lunch. In the afternoons, sometimes I receive visitors, longtime friends, clients who became friends, my son Michael and his family who live nearby. On Thursday nights, I play cards with my girlfriends, a group of ladies as full of stories as I am. On weekends, when the weather permits, I like to sit in the central square and observe the life of the town. The children running, the couples in love, the tourists enchanted with our colonial architecture. It's like watching a spectacle of life, knowing that I've been part of that scenery for so long. From time to time, I still receive news from the past. I heard that Gerald died many years ago, alone, in a nursing home in Norfolk. He never remarried, never recovered his fortune or his status. For a time, after his stroke, he still maintained the small property on the outskirts of town. He lived like a ghost, rarely seen, commented on only in whispers. When I learned of his death, I did something that perhaps many wouldn't understand. I went to the cemetery and left flowers on his grave. Not out of love or forgiveness, some wounds are too deep to completely heal, but out of gratitude. Because paradoxically, it was through that pain that I found my strength, my voice, my true life. In a sense, Gerald was like one of those pieces of furniture that arrive at my workshop completely ruined. His soul was so damaged, so deformed by lies and pride, that there was no possible restoration. But from his wreckage, I managed to salvage something beautiful for myself: freedom, strength, and eventually the ability to truly love and be loved. Life has taught me that people are like these antique pieces. Some can be restored, others are too damaged, some are worth the patient effort, the meticulous care, others are like rotten wood, which crumbles at the touch. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference, and in understanding that not all furniture, not all people, were made to last. My Anthony was one of those rare pieces made of noble wood, built to last for generations. His absence still hurts, but I am grateful for the years we had. I see traces of him in our children. I hear echoes of his voice in the laughter of our grandchildren. And so, he remains present, like those antique pieces I restore, transformed, but still carrying his essence. Now, in my peaceful nights, when I sit on the porch of this house in Williamsburg, the same one we bought more than 40 years ago, I feel a peace that I never imagined possible. I look at the stars, so bright in the country sky, and I thank for each step of the journey, even the most painful ones, because each one of them brought me here. And here, my dears, is exactly where I should be. My dear ones who have accompanied me this far, I want to share with you some things I've learned in my 78 years of life. Things that perhaps can serve as comfort or guidance for those who are going through difficult times. If you are living in a relationship where there is no respect, where there is control, humiliation, or any kind of abuse, be it physical or emotional, know that this is not love. True love builds. It doesn't destroy. It elevates, doesn't diminish. It liberates, doesn't imprison. It took me years to understand this. Years to realize that I deserved more, that I was worth more. Many times we accept unworthy situations because we've been convinced that we don't deserve better, or because we're afraid of the unknown, or simply because we don't see a way out. But believe me when I say, there is always a way out. It may not be easy, it may not be immediate, but it exists. Just as I found mine, you will find yours too. I learned that silence can be both a prison and a tool. For a long time I stayed quiet, swallowed my tears, hid the marks, physical and emotional. But when I finally found my voice, when I broke that silence, it was like breaking the walls of a prison that I had helped build myself. When I look back at that 17-year-old girl, forced into a marriage she didn't want, I see that even in the darkest moments, a part of me never completely surrendered. Like those noble woods I work with today, which may be scratched, faded, even broken, but which keep at their core a strength, a beauty that no one can take away. We are all like that, resilient by nature, capable of rising from the ashes, of transforming pain into wisdom. As I say to my clients when they look suspiciously at a piece of furniture seemingly beyond saving, the value is not in what you see now, but in what this piece once was and what it can still become. How many times have I felt like one of these discarded pieces of furniture without value? But life has its own plans for us. Like an antique piece that carries marks of history, we too carry our scars. They don't diminish us. On the contrary, they tell our story. They witness our strength. When I restore a piece, I don't completely erase its marks. Some of them are part of its identity, its unique character. The same happens with us. It's not about forgetting the past, but about giving it new meaning, transforming it into something that strengthens us, not diminishes us. I also learned that sometimes we need to reach our limit to discover our true strength. It was at the moment when I thought I couldn't take it anymore that I found in myself a courage I didn't know existed. As an old American saying goes, rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. The truth, my dears, is a powerful weapon. While I lived in lies, both the one imposed on me and the one I imposed on myself, I lived only half a life. It was by embracing the truth, however painful it might be, that I finally liberated myself. If you are going through an abusive situation, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, please don't stay silent. Seek help. No matter what country or city you are in, there are people and organizations ready to support you. Talk to someone you trust, a family member, a friend, a professional. Don't carry this burden alone. Remember, your value is not defined by another person. You don't need anyone's approval to be worthy of love and respect. As I always tell my grandchildren, your value is within you. No one can take it away unless you allow them to. And if you know someone who may be living in an abusive situation, extend your hand. Sometimes all we need is to know that we're not alone, that someone cares, that someone believes in us. Be that someone. Anywhere in the world, respect for human rights and dignity are universal values. No one has the right to humiliate, control, or hurt another person, regardless of culture or tradition. Together, as a global community, we can make a difference for those who suffer in silence. And to you who have followed me this far, who patiently listened to the stories of this old restorer, my sincere thanks. If something I shared today touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. It's through these real-life stories that we can touch other lives, transform other realities. Do it now, not just for me, but for all those women who, like me, needed to find their voice. Also leave in the comments the word restoration, so I know who really followed this story to the end and understood its true message, that all of us, like antique furniture, deserve a chance to be restored, to shine again. As a restorer of furniture and of my own life, I can assure you, there is no piece so broken that it cannot be fixed, no story so painful that it cannot be rewritten. Mine was. Yours can be too. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. I read all your comments and would love to know what town you're watching from and what time of day you found this video. When my daughter's bedroom door opened in the middle of the night, I pretended to be asleep. 3 months of silence, listening to those footsteps in the hallway. I had suspicions, but the day I found purple bruises on her little legs, I knew I needed to do more than just pray. Hello, my dear friends. What a blessing to chat with you like this, cozy in my rocking chair. I'm Eleanor May Wilson, 72 years young, and I live here in Mapleton, a small town in the heart of Ohio. Every day after lunch, when the sun isn't too strong, I like to sit in my garden and observe nature. Beautiful, clean, and real. My children gave me some seedlings as gifts when I moved to this little house. At first, I didn't think they'd survive because I never had much of a green thumb. But you know how it is. You care for them daily, talk to them, and they respond by growing more beautiful each day. It's like life itself, isn't it? You nurture, you give love, and even after the storms, things bloom again. From my porch, I can see the entire sky, clouds drifting slowly by, and I feel such peace. The peace that took me so long to find. Nobody told me that old age would bring this relief, this comfort of finally being at peace with my memories. Oh, before I continue our conversation, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying my company, please click that like button and subscribe to the channel so we can continue these chats another time. And tell me in the comments, which town or city are you watching from? Is it morning with your coffee, after lunch, or evening with a warm cup of tea like mine? I read all the comments, you know. I'm so happy to know where you're from and what time of day you set aside for this old grandma. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. You know, my dears, there are stories we keep for years, even decades, because they're difficult to tell. But there came a time when I realized that keeping certain things only makes them weigh more heavily. Today, I want to share something that completely changed my life, about a time when I had to choose between the painful silence and the courage that saves. A story about how sometimes a mother's love must become a strength we never knew we had inside us. It was a time when footsteps in the night filled me with dread. A time when I discovered that the walls of my own home hid shadows I didn't want to see. But as they say here in Mapleton, after the fiercest storm comes the calm. And that's how it happened with me and my little Sophie. I was born in Millerville, a small town here in Ohio, in 1953. Back then, everything was simpler, but also harder, you know? My father, Gerald Wilson, worked as a carpenter, making furniture that was true works of art. My dear mother, Teresa, took care of the house and sold embroidery to supplement our income. It was from her that I learned to have a steady hand with needle and thread. We were a family of 6 children, and I was the youngest of the girls. My 2 older brothers, Jack and Owen, were almost grown men when I was still playing with dolls. They grew strong like our father, working from an early age in the carpentry shop, learning the trade. Then came my sister Irene, who was always the studious one, and Zelda, who had a beautiful voice and sang in the church choir. I, the youngest girl, grew up hearing everyone say I was just like Mom, both in my quiet manner and in my skill with sewing. Our house was small but cozy, built by my father himself. It was at the end of a dirt road near a small creek where we washed clothes and played on hot days. It had 3 cramped bedrooms, one for the boys, one for the girls, and one for our parents. In the kitchen, the heart of the home, was a wood stove that kept everything warm during Millerville's harsh winters. The smell of homemade bread and apple pie that my mother made still lives in my memory. It was a time of bare feet running on grass, climbing trees to pick fruit, playing ring around the rosy with the neighbors until sunset. We didn't have much, but we never lacked the essentials, love and respect, at home. From a young age, around 5 or 6, I would sit beside my mother to learn the first stitches. While other children ran around, I liked to watch her embroider, fascinated by the flowers and birds that were born from those magical hands. "Eleanor has fairy hands," Grandma Catherine would say, when she saw my first works. By 8 years old, I was making small embroideries that my mother sold along with hers. The school was almost a half-hour walk away. We all went together, the older siblings looking after the younger ones. I remember my little penmanship notebook, the times tables lessons I struggled with, and Miss Dorothy, who had a stern but fair manner. I studied only until 4th grade. In those days, girls from humble families learned the basics and then stayed home, helping their mothers and preparing for marriage. On Sundays, the whole family went to church. Women on one side, men on the other, and afterward lunch at Grandma Catherine's house, which brought together all the cousins, uncles, and aunts. It was a festive day, featuring pot roast and apple pie, traditional recipes passed down through generations. Afterward, the men played cards and the women formed conversation circles, exchanging recipes and telling stories. It was on one of these Sunday afternoons, when I was 12 years old, that I met Walter's family. They had moved from rural Kentucky to Millerville. His father, Mr. Edward, was a distant friend of my father's and came to work with wood too. Walter was 17 and already helping his father. I remember him looking at me, and I, all embarrassed, hiding my face in my mother's apron. At that time, I didn't know that this shy boy, with brown eyes and calloused hands, would change my destiny forever. I had no idea that, years later, he would be the father of my Sophie. But before that, a lot of water passed under the bridge. Life in Millerville followed its own rhythm, marked by the seasons, harvests, religious celebrations. The 4th of July festival was the most anticipated event of the year. The town square filled with booths. There was square dancing, fireworks, and lots of good food. It was at one of these festivals, when I was 13, that I felt the first sign I was leaving childhood behind. My mother noticed before I did, when she saw a small bloodstain on my slip. She quickly took me home, explained about becoming a woman, as they called it back then, and gave me a cloth that I should use every month from then on. "Now you're a young lady, Eleanor. You have to be more careful around boys," she said with that worried look. And so, between embroidery, prayers, and responsibilities, I grew up, gradually leaving childhood behind and entering a phase that would change everything. Time passed, and when I turned 17, Walter was already 22 and working steadily in the carpentry shop with his father. We would meet at Sunday services, at church socials, and occasionally he would appear at our house, always with the excuse of talking to my brothers. But I knew, and everyone knew, that he came to see me. Our courtship began like that, under the watchful eyes of the family. A respectful courtship, as was done in those days. At 19, I got married. It was a simple ceremony, but beautiful, in Millerville's First Baptist Church. I sewed my own dress, with help from my mother and my sister Zelda. It was made of satin fabric, with small flowers embroidered on the bodice. Each tiny flower took hours of work, but the result was enchanting. We went to live in a small house that Walter built, with help from my father and brothers. It was small, but to us it seemed like a palace. And I, full of dreams, set up a little corner with my sewing machine, a wedding gift from my parents. I started taking in sewing, doing alterations and small repairs for the neighbors. At first, Walter was a good husband, hard-working. He came home tired, but always with a smile on his face. Our first year of marriage was peaceful, with adaptation and discoveries. He would leave early to work at the carpentry shop, and I took care of the house, sewed, and gradually we built our life. At 21, I became pregnant with our Sophie. The pregnancy was smooth, despite the morning sickness that left me weak during the first few months. Walter was over the moon when I told him, already planning to make the baby's crib himself. Our daughter was born on a winter morning in 1974, rosy-cheeked and with black hair just like her father. "She'll be named Sophie after my grandmother," Walter said, and I agreed. It was a beautiful name, delicate, like her. The problem started when Sophie was about 2 years old. Mr. Edward's carpentry shop wasn't doing well, facing competition from a larger factory that opened in Springfield. Walter began to get worried, tense. Sometimes he'd come home smelling of whiskey. It wasn't every day, but I noticed it becoming more frequent. On those nights, I'd put Sophie to bed early and stay in the kitchen, sewing and praying for him to come home in a good mood. When Sophie turned 3, the carpentry shop closed for good. Mr. Edward, now elderly, decided to return to Kentucky to live with another son. But we stayed in Millerville. Walter got a job at a sawmill, earning less and working more, and that's when his transformation began. The gentle man I knew started disappearing, giving way to someone bitter. He complained about everything: the food, the house, my sewing, Sophie's crying. Any little thing was cause for explosion. At first, it was just shouting. I would send Sophie to her room and endure in silence, waiting for the storm to pass. The first time he hit me was after a neighbor child's birthday party. We returned home, and he complained that I had been too friendly with Richard, an acquaintance of ours. "You were throwing yourself at him," he shouted, completely beside himself. I tried to explain that we were just talking about some sewing work his wife wanted to commission me for, but Walter wouldn't listen. The slap came out of nowhere, strong, making me stagger. I was in shock, with my hand on my face, unable to believe it. He had never raised a hand to me before. That night, I cried hidden in the bathroom so Sophie wouldn't hear. The next day, Walter woke up remorseful, asked for forgiveness, swore it would never happen again, and I believed him. I wanted to believe. It was the drink, I thought, not him. But it wasn't just that one time. The outbursts of anger became more frequent. Sophie merely dropping a glass, or me taking a little longer at the market, was enough for him to turn everything into drama. Our house, once so cheerful, became heavy, as if the walls held the echo of arguments. When Sophie turned 5, Walter lost his job at the sawmill. He was unemployed for almost 3 months, drinking more and more. My sewing became the household's support. I worked day and night at the machine, taking orders for clothes, repairs, curtains, whatever came up. I had a loyal clientele, thank God, but money was tight. It was during this period that my brother Jack, who had moved to Springfield years before, suggested we move there too. "There's work at the paper mill, Eleanor. Bring Walter. You can stay at our house until you get settled." Walter resisted at first. Man's pride. He didn't want to depend on his brother-in-law, but when the store owner refused to extend us any more credit, he gave in. We packed our bags, sold what little we had, and left for Springfield. During our first months in Springfield, we stayed at my brother Jack's house with his wife Harriet. They welcomed us with open arms, especially Sophie, who became the joy of the house. Walter got the job at the paper mill, and I continued sewing, now for a new clientele that Harriet introduced me to. Gradually, we saved a bit of money and rented a simple house, but our own. It was 1979. Sophie had just turned 5 and started attending kindergarten. Everything seemed to be improving. Walter was calmer with the new job, drinking less, and even played with Sophie occasionally. I came to think that we had turned the page, that the bad days had been left behind in Millerville. My other brother, Owen, also ended up coming to Springfield the following year. With our father's health deteriorating, he wanted to be closer to us. Owen was always the quietest, but also the most observant. From the beginning, I noticed that he looked at Walter with suspicion, as if seeing something I was trying to hide. "That husband of yours doesn't smell right to me, Eleanor," he told me once when we were alone. "If he does anything to you or to the girl, you tell me." I was embarrassed, changed the subject, said that Walter had changed, that everything was fine now. But deep down, those words gave me comfort. It was good to know that my brothers were nearby, looking out for me and Sophie. The calm lasted only a short while. When Sophie was almost 8, Walter was promoted to supervisor at the factory. He earned better, but the responsibility increased, and with it, the stress. He started arriving home late, always tense. The fights returned, worse than before. He complained about the mess in the house, the food, the noise Sophie made when playing. Anything became a reason. It was during this time that I noticed the first change in Sophie. My girl, always so cheerful and talkative, began to become quiet, frightened. At school, the teacher called me, concerned because Sophie was distant, no longer participating in activities as before. At home, when she heard the sound of the key in the door announcing her father's arrival, she would run to her room, like a frightened little animal hiding from a predator. One night, I woke up with Sophie beside my bed, crying softly. "Can I sleep here, Mom?" she asked, in such a small voice I could barely hear. Walter, who was sleeping beside me, woke up irritated. "Go back to your room, girl. You're too big to be afraid of the dark," he scolded. Sophie trembled, but obeyed, returning to her room with dragging steps. The next morning, I discovered she had wet the bed, something that hadn't happened since she was very young. When I asked what was happening, if she had had a nightmare, She just lowered her head and said she didn't remember. But her eyes, my God, her eyes said something else. They were filled with a fear no child should know. I began to pay more attention. Sophie, who had always been a clean child, suddenly didn't want to bathe anymore. She complained of constant stomach aches. She had nightmares almost every night. At school, the teacher reported that she had moments where she seemed absent, as if her mind were far away. It was on a Sunday afternoon, when Walter had gone out to play cards with colleagues from the factory, that I had the courage to ask Sophie directly. We were alone, sewing together. I had taught her the first stitches, just as my mother taught me. "Sophie," I began carefully, "did something happen that you want to tell me about? Something that's making you sad?" She was silent for such a long time that I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, without raising her eyes from the embroidery, she murmured, "Dad gets angry with me at night." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, sweetie? What happens at night?" She shrugged, still not looking at me. "He comes into my room when you're sleeping, says I did something wrong, that I need to learn to be a good girl." At that moment, I felt as if the ground had opened beneath my feet. Sophie's words kept hammering in my head for days. "He comes into my room when you're sleeping." I couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep. I started paying attention to everything, the looks, the silences, the reactions. I observed how Sophie hunched her shoulders when her father approached, how her eyes lowered, how she seemed to want to disappear. One night, I pretended to fall asleep earlier than usual. Walter stayed in the living room, watching television as usual. I lay still, barely breathing, my ears alert to every sound in the house. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard his footsteps in the hallway. They weren't footsteps toward our bedroom. They were footsteps that stopped at Sophie's door. I heard the soft click of the doorknob, the door opening, and then silence. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would explode. I wanted to get up, run, scream, but something paralyzed me. Fear? Doubt? To this day, I can't explain what kept me pinned to that bed. Perhaps the foolish hope that I had misunderstood everything, that he was just checking if she was covered, as loving fathers do. How long did he stay in her room? Half an hour? An hour? It seemed like forever. When I heard her bedroom door open again, I closed my eyes tightly, pretending to be in deep sleep. I felt the mattress sink with his weight as he lay down beside me. I smelled the sweat, the cigarettes, and I felt disgust, a deep disgust that turned my stomach. The next morning, I observed Sophie at breakfast. She was quieter than normal, with dark circles that no child should have. When Walter left for work, I approached her, trying to sound casual. "Did you sleep well, my darling?" She just shrugged, her eyes fixed on the bowl of oatmeal she'd barely touched. "Sophie," I began, with the gentlest voice I could find, "you can tell me anything. You know that, right? Mommy's here to protect you." For an instant, I saw a spark in her eyes, something like hope, but it quickly faded. "There's nothing to tell, Mom." And she left the table, leaving her breakfast half-eaten. The next day, I took Sophie to school and, instead of going home, went straight to the payphone in the town square. I called the school supply store where my sister-in-law Harriet worked. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice trembling. "It's urgent." We met at lunchtime on a park bench. With a voice broken by sobs, I told her my suspicions. Harriet listened in silence, her face growing paler and paler. "Eleanor," she finally said, holding my hands in hers, "you need to be certain before making any accusation. But if it's true, my God, you need to get Sophie out of that house." "How can I be sure?" I asked, desperate. "He always says I'm seeing things, that I'm paranoid, and Sophie doesn't talk. She's afraid." "Look for signs," Harriet said, with a firmness that surprised me. "Marks on her body, torn or dirty clothes. Watch when she bathes." That afternoon, I asked Sophie to take a bath earlier than normal. I went into the bathroom with her, saying I would wash her hair. It was something we did sometimes, it wouldn't seem strange. When she began to undress, I felt my blood freeze. There were purple marks on her thighs, finger marks, as if someone had held her tightly, and on the back of her legs, small marks that looked like cigarette burns. "Sophie," I whispered, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "How did you hurt your legs, my darling?" She looked at her own legs, as if only then noticing the marks. "I fell on the school stairs," she answered too quickly. "And these round marks? They look like burns." She looked away. "I don't know. Maybe when I was playing near the stove." Lies. Desperate lies from a terrified child. My God, how did I not notice before? How could I have been so blind? That night I couldn't pretend. When Walter arrived, he noticed something different in my look. "What is it, woman? You look like you've seen a ghost." "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. "About Sophie." He visibly stiffened. "What about her?" "There are marks on her body, injuries she can't explain." Walter let out a forced laugh. "Kids are always getting hurt, Eleanor. They fall, they bump into things. Sophie's always been clumsy." "There are cigarette burns on her legs," I insisted, my voice rising an octave, "and bruises on her thighs." His face changed. The mask of normality fell for an instant, revealing something dark, threatening. "Are you accusing me of something?" I lost my courage. The fear I saw in my daughter's eyes was now in me. "No, I'm just worried." He came closer, grabbing my arm tightly. "You're making things up, Eleanor. You've always been like this, paranoid, seeing problems where there aren't any. The girl fell at school, I already told you. Now, enough of this subject." That night was torment. Lying beside him, I felt waves of disgust and fear washing over me. I prayed, asking God for strength and guidance. And an idea began to form in my mind. The next day, with the excuse that I needed materials for a special sewing order, I went downtown. I entered an electronics store where, weeks before, I had seen something called a baby monitor in the window, a device with a camera used to monitor babies. It was expensive, far beyond what we could afford. But I sold my only valuable possession, a pair of gold earrings that I had inherited from my mother. The salesman explained how it worked, how to install it, how to see the images afterward. I returned home with the device hidden in my purse. I waited for the right moment when Walter went to work and Sophie was at school. I entered her room and installed the camera inside the teddy bear that sat on the shelf, facing the bed. The bear had been a gift from Uncle Owen on her last birthday, and Sophie adored it. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Walter arrived tired and went to bed early, or stayed up late watching television, but didn't enter Sophie's room. I began to think that maybe I really was becoming paranoid. Maybe I had misinterpreted the signs, the injuries. On the 4th night, I woke up startled. Something had awakened me. A noise? A premonition? I reached out to Walter's side of the bed. It was empty. I looked at the clock. 3:12 in the morning. With my heart in my throat, I got up silently. The door to our bedroom was ajar. In the hallway, I saw a sliver of light coming from Sophie's room. I approached, step by step, trying not to make noise. The door was closed, but not completely. Through the gap, I could see part of the room. What I saw at that moment will forever be etched in my memory. Walter was sitting on the edge of Sophie's bed. He had a cigarette in one hand and in the other. My God, I don't even want to remember. Sophie was lying still as a statue, her eyes open staring at the ceiling, tears silently streaming down her face. I backed away, horrified, covering my mouth with my hand to keep from screaming. I returned to our bedroom, trembling uncontrollably. I wanted to take Sophie in my arms and flee from that house at that exact moment. But I knew I needed proof. The word of a woman against a man, in those days, in that town. I needed something concrete. In the morning, I waited for Walter to leave for work. Sophie had already gone to school, taken by him as usual. I took the camera from the teddy bear and, following the salesman's instructions, connected it to the video device to see the images. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. I locked myself in the bathroom and vomited. I cried until I had no more tears. Then a strange calm invaded me, an icy determination. That man would not touch my daughter again, never again. But what to do? Where to go? I didn't have enough money saved to start over from scratch. And Walter would find us, I was sure. I needed help. I picked up the phone and called my brother Owen. I didn't go into details, just said, "I need you and Jack to come to our house tonight. It's about Sophie." "It's urgent." Owen sensed something in my voice. "Did something happen to the girl?" "When you arrive, I'll explain everything. Please, don't say anything to Walter if you run into him. Say you want to surprise Sophie, something like that." The day dragged on with agonizing slowness. I picked up Sophie from school earlier than normal, making up that she had a doctor's appointment. Instead of going home, we went to Harriet's house. I told her what I had discovered, showed her the recorded images. She cried with me, hugged me, and said that Sophie could stay there as long as necessary. "But what are you going to do, Eleanor?" she asked, worried. "I'm going to get justice," I answered, with a voice that didn't even sound like mine. Justice the way it needs to be done. I returned home alone, leaving Sophie safe with Harriet. I prepared dinner as if it were a normal day. I left the videotape ready next to the television. And I waited. Walter arrived at 6, as always. He asked about Sophie. "She's at Aunt Harriet's," I replied calmly. "Jack and Owen are coming to dinner with us tonight. I thought it better for her to stay there, playing with her cousins." He seemed to relax. "Oh, your brothers are coming? Good. It's been a while." At 7, the doorbell rang. It was them. Jack, the eldest, always serious and responsible, and Owen, the youngest of the men, a man of few words but penetrating gaze. They entered, greeted Walter with formal handshakes. "Shall we eat first?" I asked, serving the food I had prepared. A dinner that nobody there really ate. The tension was palpable. Even Walter, normally oblivious to subtleties, seemed to sense that something was wrong. After dinner, with coffee cups on the table, I took a deep breath. "I have something to show you," I said, getting up and going to the television. "Something I recorded." Walter's face went livid. "What have you been doing, Eleanor?" I didn't answer. I turned on the video device, inserted the tape, and pressed play. The grainy black and white images began to play on the screen. Sophie's room, at night, the door opening, Walter entering. I didn't need to show more than a few seconds. My brothers understood immediately. Jack jumped up, his face contorted with rage. Owen remained seated, but his expression had changed to something I had never seen before. A cold, calculating hatred. Walter tried to run. He knocked over the chair as he got up, ran for the door. But Jack was faster, blocking the exit. Owen finally stood up, calmly closing the curtains in the living room. "Eleanor," Jack said, without taking his eyes off Walter, "you'd better leave now. Go to Harriet's house. Stay with Sophie." I grabbed my purse, where I had already placed the original videotape and some important documents. At the door, I turned one last time. Walter was cornered between my brothers, his face a mask of fear. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw in his eyes the same terror he had caused in my daughter. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice trembling. Owen answered, with a frightening calm, "We're going to teach you what happens to men who hurt children." I closed the door behind me, knowing that what would happen in that room was not something I wanted to witness. On the street, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I breathed deeply, feeling a mix of horror, relief, and a strange sense of liberation. I walked to Harriet's house where Sophie was sleeping, finally safe. That was the first night in a long time that I also managed to sleep without fear. At Harriet's house, sitting next to the bed where Sophie slept, I wondered what might be happening in my house at that moment. Part of me wanted my brothers to make Walter suffer every pain he had inflicted on my daughter. Another part feared the consequences. What if they went too far? What if the police got involved? Sophie moved in her sleep, her little face frowning as if having a nightmare. I stroked her hair gently so as not to wake her. "Everything's all right now," I whispered. "Mommy's here. No one's going to hurt you again." Harriet entered the room with a cup of tea. "You need to try to rest a bit," she said, handing me the hot drink. "Tomorrow you'll have many decisions to make." I had barely taken 2 sips of the tea when we heard knocking at the door. My heart raced. Was it the police? Or Walter, who had somehow escaped from my brothers? Harriet went to answer. I heard muffled male voices, then footsteps approaching the room. It was Jack and Owen. Their faces were grim, tense, their clothes rumpled. The knuckles of Jack's hands were red and swollen. "It's done," Jack said simply, sitting heavily in the corner chair. "What did you—" I began, but Owen interrupted me. "Better you don't know details, Eleanor. I can only say he won't lay a finger on Sophie again. Or on you." A heavy silence fell over us. Nobody asked if Walter was alive. Nobody wanted to know. "And now?" I finally asked. "What do we do?" Jack sighed, running his hand over his tired face. "Early tomorrow morning we'll get your things from the house, the bare necessities. You and Sophie can stay here with us as long as needed." "And him?" Owen and Jack exchanged glances. It was Owen who answered, "He's leaving Springfield. We gave him that choice. Disappear and never come back, or face not only justice, but the entire town when they learn what he did." I didn't ask anything else. That night, lying on the makeshift mattress beside Sophie's bed, I cried silently. Not for Walter, he didn't deserve a single tear. I cried for the lost time, for the signs I ignored, for my daughter's suffering that I couldn't prevent. The next morning, as promised, my brothers took me back to the house to get our things. There was no sign of Walter, but the living room still held evidence of the previous night, a broken chair, stains on the rug that I preferred not to examine closely. I took clothes, documents, some photos, none with Walter, Sophie's favorite toys, and my sewing machine, my livelihood. As we were leaving, I noticed the teddy bear on the shelf in Sophie's room. That same bear that had housed the camera, the silent witness to the horrors. I hesitated to take it, thinking it might bring bad memories for Sophie. But I decided to take it anyway. That bear wasn't to blame for anything, and in a way, it had been our savior. The following days were a blur of confused emotions. Sophie seemed relieved not to see her father, but was still frightened, withdrawn. I took her to a doctor, who confirmed what I already knew and didn't want to accept. The abuse had been systematic and had been going on for months. He recommended that Sophie talk to a psychologist, but in those days, in a town like Springfield, such resources were scarce. A week later, I received a summons to appear at the police station. Someone in the neighborhood had heard the commotion that night and called the police. Nothing had been registered at the time, but suspicions arose when Walter no longer showed up at the factory. Sitting in front of the sheriff, a middle-aged man with deep circles under his eyes and an expression that oscillated between boredom and irritation, I felt afraid. What if he didn't believe me? What if he blamed my brothers? What if he took Sophie away from me? "Mrs. Wilson," he began, leafing through a notepad. "Your husband has been missing for a week. His colleagues at the factory said he didn't show up for work, didn't notify anyone. The last time he was seen was entering your house Wednesday night last week. Do you know where he is?" I took a deep breath. "I don't know, Sheriff. He left." "Just like that? For no reason?" I hesitated. I didn't want to lie, but I also couldn't tell the whole truth. "We had a fight about our daughter." The sheriff raised his eyes from the notepad, suddenly more attentive. "What kind of fight?" It was at this moment that I made the most difficult and bravest decision of my life. I opened my purse and took out the videotape that I had kept, the proof. "This," I said, placing the tape on the desk, "will explain everything." The sheriff looked at the tape, then at me, with an eyebrow raised. "What's on there?" "Evidence that my husband, that he abused our daughter. I put a camera in her room. It's all recorded." The sheriff's expression changed. The boredom gave way to something darker, more intense. "Are you aware of the seriousness of this accusation?" "I am. That's why I brought evidence." He picked up the tape, turned it over in his hands, thoughtful. Then he called another officer and asked him to bring a video player. He asked if I wanted to leave the room while they watched. I decided to stay. I had already seen enough of those images to know what they would see. 20 minutes later, the sheriff turned off the device, his face pale. The other officer left the room without saying a word, visibly disturbed. A heavy silence settled between us. "Mrs. Wilson," the sheriff finally spoke, his voice softer than before. "Where is your daughter now?" "With my sister-in-law. She's safe." He nodded, thoughtful. "And your brothers? Do they know all about this?" I felt a chill down my spine. "Yes, they helped me confront my husband when I found out." "And what happened in that confrontation?" "It was the moment of truth. My brothers told him that if he didn't disappear from town, they would take this tape to the police and let everyone know what he did. He chose to leave." The sheriff stared at me for a long time, as if trying to read the truth in my eyes. I held the gaze, silently praying. Finally, he sighed. "I understand." He took the tape and put it in a drawer of the desk. "I'm going to open a case against your husband for child abuse. I'll issue a search and arrest warrant. If he's found, he'll have to answer for his crimes." I felt an enormous weight lifting from my shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff." He raised his hand, interrupting my thanks. "Don't thank me yet. This is going to be hard for you, and especially for your daughter. You'll have to testify, undergo examinations. And even with this evidence," he indicated the drawer where he had stored the tape, "it's not guaranteed that he'll be convicted. The system doesn't always work as it should, especially in cases like this." I left the police station with mixed feelings. On one hand, relieved for having made the formal complaint, for having delivered the evidence. On the other, terrified by the possibility of Walter returning, of having to face him in a courtroom, of exposing Sophie to more trauma. In the weeks that followed, I lived in a constant state of alert. With every noise in the street, every knock at the door, my heart raced. Sophie had nightmares almost every night, woke up screaming, calling for me. We slept together, clinging to each other like castaways in a storm. The news spread through the neighborhood, inevitably. People whispered when we passed, looked with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Some avoided greeting us, as if what had happened was contagious. Others, especially women, came to offer support, bring food, ask if we needed anything. One day, about a month after the complaint, I received a call from the police station. They had found Walter's car abandoned near the Kentucky state line. Inside it, a letter, a confession, and a goodbye. He wouldn't be coming back. The sheriff told me they would continue looking, that the confession was practically an admission of guilt, but that without him present, the case would technically remain open. "But you can rest easy," he added. "From the tone of the letter, he doesn't intend to return." That night, I had a strange dream. I was in an open field, holding Sophie's hand. Around us, flowers grew. Not common flowers, but flowers made of colored fabric like the ones I embroidered. The wind swayed them gently, creating an undulating sea of colors. And on the horizon, a rising sun, bright, promising. I woke up with a different feeling in my chest. It wasn't just fear or pain anymore. It was something new, something I had forgotten how it felt. Hope. I looked at Sophie, sleeping beside me, her little face finally relaxed, at peace. I made a silent promise to her and to myself. We would rebuild our lives, We would find joy again. We would overcome this together. That same morning, I made two important decisions. First, I accepted the doctor's suggestion and sought out a psychologist for Sophie. I was lucky, a young psychologist, Dr. Norma, had just moved to Springfield and was seeing patients at affordable prices at the local parish. The second decision was more practical. I rented a small storefront downtown to set up my own sewing workshop. It wouldn't be easy to start over, but I had my skills, my determination, and now a new purpose: to ensure that Sophie had a safe, happy, and fulfilling life. The road would be long, I knew. The emotional wounds would take time to heal, perhaps longer than the physical ones. But for the first time in a long time, I could see a future beyond the pain. The following months were a period of reconstruction, slow and painful, but steady. Starting from scratch is never easy, especially when carrying such deep scars. But I was determined to create a new life for Sophie and me, a life without fear. The sewing workshop I rented was small, a cubicle with a narrow storefront on Main Street in downtown Springfield. There was just enough room for my sewing machine, a small table to cut fabrics, an old mannequin I bought secondhand, and a few chairs for customers. But for me, that little space represented independence, a fresh start. At first, orders were few. I didn't have much money to invest in fabrics or materials, so I mainly worked on repairs and alterations. Harriet helped me a lot, promoting my work among her friends. "Eleanor is the best seamstress I know," she would tell everyone. And gradually, the clientele grew. Sophie continued to live with us at Jack and Harriet's house. I wanted to save as much as possible so we could have our own home again, a place just for us without bad memories. My brothers insisted there was no rush, that we could stay with them as long as necessary. But I knew we needed our own space to truly rebuild our lives. The sessions with the psychologist, Dr. Norma, were helping Sophie. At first, she barely spoke, only drew. Dark scenes, frightening figures, houses with locked doors. But over time, the drawings became more colorful, and she began to open up. Norma guided me on how to act, what to say, how to help my daughter process the trauma without reliving it. "You did everything right, Mrs. Wilson," Norma told me once. "You believed your daughter, acted to protect her, sought help. Many mothers, unfortunately, deny or ignore the signs." Her words comforted me, but didn't erase the guilt I felt for not having noticed sooner, for not having acted faster. This guilt would accompany me for many years, even knowing rationally that I had done the best I could under the circumstances we had. One day, about 6 months after Walter's disappearance, I received an unexpected visit at the workshop. It was Margaret, a lady I knew only by sight, the mother of one of Sophie's school friends. She entered timidly, looking around as if afraid of being seen there. "Mrs. Wilson," she began hesitantly, "I'm sorry to come like this without notice, but I really needed to talk to you." I offered a chair and she sat, her hands restless in her lap. She seemed nervous, anxious. Well, the whole town heard what happened to your daughter. And I came because I need your help." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "My Mary, my daughter, I think she's also—" Her voice failed, and tears began to roll down her wrinkled face. "The same signs you described to the police, the fear, the nightmares, not wanting to be alone with her father." I felt a shiver run down my spine, that familiar terror, that sense of powerlessness in the face of evil. But this time, I wasn't paralyzed by fear. This time, I knew what to do. I took Margaret's trembling hands in mine. "I'll help you. We'll go to the police station together. The same sheriff who handled my case, he'll believe us." That same afternoon, I accompanied Margaret to the police station. Sheriff Davis received us, listened to her account attentively, and immediately initiated an investigation. 3 days later, Margaret's husband was arrested. There were other victims besides his own daughter, we discovered later. A monster who hid behind a respectable facade, just like Walter. In the months that followed, other mothers came to seek me out. Some just to talk, to understand how I had noticed the signs, to know how Sophie was recovering. Others, unfortunately, because they suspected their own children were being abused. For each of them, I offered the same support that Harriet and Norma had offered me: listening, understanding, and practical help to seek justice and protection. 1 year after Walter's flight, I managed to save enough money to make a down payment on a small house in the West Side neighborhood in the outskirts of Springfield. It was small, in need of repairs, but it was ours. Sophie, who was now almost 10, helped choose the colors to paint the walls. She chose yellow for the kitchen, light blue for her room, and soft green for the living room. Cheerful colors, colors of hope. On the day of the move, Jack, Owen, and their friends from the factory helped transport the few pieces of furniture we had. Harriet organized a lunch for everyone in the backyard of the new house. It was a small celebration, not just of the house, but of our new life, our survival. It was also on this day that I made a decision that would change the course of our lives. Sitting on the porch of our new house, watching Sophie play with Harriet's daughters in the yard, without fear, smiling as a child should smile, I realized we needed to do more than just survive. "I'm going to create a support group," I announced during coffee after lunch, "for women and children who have gone through what we went through. A safe place to talk, to strengthen themselves, to seek help." My brothers exchanged concerned glances. "Are you sure, Eleanor?" Jack asked. "This is going to make you relive everything again, every time." "I already relive everything anyway," I replied. "At least this way, these memories will serve to help other people." And so was born the Circle of Hope, which began with weekly meetings in the living room of my house. At first, we were just 5 women, including Margaret and me. We met on Wednesday nights after the children were in bed. We drank tea, ate cookies, and talked about our experiences, our fears, our small and large victories. Over time, the group grew. Dr. Norma volunteered to participate, bringing her professional expertise. The local church gave us a larger room for meetings when our house could no longer accommodate all the participants. A lawyer in town began to offer free legal guidance for women who wanted to report their abusers. I discovered there was a strength in me that I didn't know, an ability to transform pain into action, fear into determination. Each time I helped another woman escape an abusive situation, each time I saw a child begin to recover, I felt I was rebuilding not just my own life, but contributing to a slightly better world. Sophie also found her own form of healing. At school, a teacher noticed her talent for writing and encouraged her to participate in literary contests. At 12, she won her first prize with an essay about courage. When I asked her what inspired her, she answered simply, "You, Mom." We never heard concrete news of Walter again. There were rumors from time to time. Someone who saw him in Louisville. Another who swore they had encountered him in Nashville. But nothing confirmed. Deep down, it didn't matter. He had lost his power over us. Our lives were no longer defined by him, by what he did, by the fear he caused. Our sewing workshop prospered in the years that followed. I began to teach sewing classes to women from the Circle of Hope, as a way to help them achieve financial independence. Many of them came from situations where they were completely dependent on their abusers, without professional qualifications, without means to support themselves. Seeing these women transform, strengthen, rebuild their lives was a joy I cannot describe in words. And Sophie, my brave, resilient Sophie, grew to become a strong and determined young woman who never allowed the trauma to define who she was or who she could be. The path wasn't easy. There were difficult moments, relapses, nights of nightmares, and days of deep sadness. But together, step by step, we built a life worth living. Today, at 72, life has a sweetness I never imagined I would know. I still live here in Mapleton, in the same little house in the West Side neighborhood, which over the years has been improved, painted, expanded. The backyard, which was once just bare earth, is now full of colorful flowers, aromatic herbs, and even some vegetables I cultivate with care. My neighbors always stop by to get some mint for their tea or a bit of rosemary to season their meat. My sewing workshop, which began so small, grew and transformed. Today, it operates in the front of the house, where I built an extension with the help of my nephews. I don't work as many hours as before. Age takes its toll on eyesight and joints. But I still do some special work for long-standing customers who won't accept another seamstress. Most of the time in the workshop now is dedicated to teaching. Twice a week, I give sewing classes to women referred by the Women's Resource Center, which works in partnership with our Circle of Hope. Seeing these women, many of them emerging from situations of violence, finding financial independence, and regaining self-esteem through manual work, fills me with an indescribable joy. The Circle of Hope, which began in that little room in my house so many years ago, is now a recognized organization in the town. We have our own headquarters, volunteers, partnerships with the City Hall and national NGOs. I make a point of attending all the meetings, even though my role now is more mentor than coordinator. The younger women have taken on the leadership, bringing new ideas, new approaches, keeping the work alive and relevant. Sophie, my dear daughter, is now a woman of 51. She graduated in psychology, inspired by Dr. Norma, who helped us so much and works with children and adolescents who are victims of violence. She has a special way with the little ones, manages to make them feel safe, understood, respected. I think her own experience, though painful, gave her this gift of connecting with others suffering without being overwhelmed by it. She married a mathematics teacher, Adam, a kind and patient man she met in college. I have 2 wonderful grandchildren, Isabella, 25, who followed in her mother's footsteps and is also graduating in psychology, and Tyler, 22, who studies civil engineering in Columbus. He comes to visit me during vacations and always makes a point of spending at least 1 full day with me in the workshop, helping me organize the fabrics, listening to my stories of the old days. My brothers Jack and Owen, now elderly like me, remain nearby. Jack lost Harriet to cancer 5 years ago, a loss that deeply shook us. She was a warrior to the end, and her absence is still felt at every family gathering, every special date. Owen never married, always the most solitary of the 3, but he has a special connection with his grandnephews and grandnieces who adore him. Mornings are my favorite time of day. I wake up early with the first ray of sunlight. I prepare my coffee, sit on the porch, and watch the streets slowly awaken. Children going to school, workers to their factories and offices, the mailman making his rounds. Life in its normal, safe, predictable rhythm. A blessing I've learned not to take for granted. In the afternoons, when I'm not teaching at the workshop, I like to receive visitors. Former students bring their children to meet me, calling me Grandma Eleanor, even though we have no blood ties. Ladies from the Circle of Hope come for tea, to discuss community problems, to ask for advice. I have a rocking chair on the porch where I sit to talk, and a basket always full of cornbread, cinnamon rolls, or cookies, old recipes from my mother that I still make with pleasure. Once a month, usually on the last Sunday, the whole family gathers at my house for lunch. Sophie and Adam, the grandchildren when they can come, my brothers, nephews, and nieces, sometimes even some close friends. The house gets full, noisy, alive. I insist on cooking myself, with help from Sophie and the girls. I prepare dishes that everyone loves, meatloaf with mashed potatoes, beef stew, fried chicken, and the dessert that can never be missing, the apple pie that was my mother's favorite. During these lunches, I look around and feel a deep gratitude. Not for what I went through, I will never be thankful for the suffering, but for the strength I discovered in myself, for the family we built, for the peace we won. I think of all the women we've helped over the years, of the children who were protected because their mothers found the courage to report, to leave, to start over. Sometimes, very rarely, I still hear news about Walter. Years ago, we learned that he had died in a car accident somewhere in Tennessee. I felt no joy at the news, not even relief. I realized he no longer had power over my thoughts, over my emotions. He was just a distant shadow of a past that, although it left scars, does not define who we are. At night, before going to sleep, I have the habit of reading a bit. I like poetry, historical novels, biographies of strong women. On the bedside table, I keep a notebook where Sophie wrote her first stories, those that began as a form of therapy and revealed her talent. Sometimes I reread these childish texts, recognizing in them the first signs of the extraordinary woman my daughter would become. And so I live my days, at peace with my past, grateful for my present, hopeful about the future. Not just my future, which at this stage of life has already become shorter than the path traveled, but the future of the women and children who will continue the work we started, who will carry forward the message that it is possible to survive, overcome, and even flourish after the storm. As they say here in Ohio, after the tempest comes the calm. And what beautiful calm life has reserved for me. My dear friends, coming to the end of our chat, I want to leave some words that come from the bottom of my heart, words that took a lot of time and many tears for me to learn. If you're going through a situation similar to what I experienced or know someone who is, I want you to know you are not alone. Silence is the greatest ally of abuse. It was by breaking that silence that I found my liberation, and it was by helping other women break theirs that I found my purpose. I learned that fear can paralyze us, but it can also drive us to act when something even more precious is at risk. When I saw those marks on my Sophie's body, the fear I felt of losing my daughter was greater than the fear I had of my husband. And it was that reversal that gave me courage to act. Trust your instincts. We, mothers, have an intuition that rarely fails. If something seems wrong, it probably is. I ignored the first signs because it was more comfortable not to see, because I didn't want to face the terrible truth. But each day of denial was one more day of suffering for my daughter. I understood, with time, that I am not responsible for the actions of others, only for my own. For years, I carried the guilt of not having noticed sooner what was happening with Sophie. But the true guilt was never mine, nor could it be. The responsibility for the abuse is solely and exclusively the abuser's. Life has a funny way of showing us our own strength. Before that fateful night, I saw myself as a weak, submissive woman, incapable of great acts. It was precisely when everything fell apart that I discovered the fortress that existed within me. As the saying goes, it's in the fall that we learn to fly. The healing process is not linear. There are good days and bad days, moments of progress and moments of relapse. For both me and Sophie, recovery was a road full of curves and obstacles. But each small victory, each nightmare less, each genuine smile was proof that we were heading in the right direction. I learned that asking for help is not weakness, it's wisdom. Alone, I would never have been able to protect Sophie and rebuild our lives. I needed the strength of my brothers, Harriet's support, Dr. Norma's professional guidance, Sheriff Davis's understanding, and later, the collective strength of our circle of hope. Hands that extend to help are blessings we shouldn't refuse out of pride. Pain can transform into purpose. What we experienced was terrible, but it wasn't in vain. Each woman I helped to leave an abusive situation, each child who was protected because their mother found courage to act, each family rebuilt on healthier foundations. All of this gave meaning to our suffering. Not that it justifies it, ever, but at least it wasn't in vain. And perhaps the most important lesson, abuse does not define who we are. For a long time, I was the woman whose husband abused their daughter. Sophie was the girl abused by her father. These invisible labels accompanied us, shaping how others saw us, and worse, how we saw ourselves. Breaking these definitions, reclaiming our identities beyond the trauma, was a fundamental part of our healing. If you're in a situation of violence, remember, there is a way out. It may seem impossible now, it may seem that you're alone, that nobody will believe you, that there's nowhere to go. But I was in that same place of despair, and I can assure you there is a path. There are people willing to help. There is a life waiting for you on the other side of fear. In every city in America, there are services to protect women and children. Seek help, even if it's just an anonymous call to understand your options. A first step, even a small one, can open the way to your liberation. And for you, who are watching and fortunately have never gone through such a situation, I ask, be alert to the signs. A neighbor with unexplained marks, a child who suddenly changed behavior, a friend who always seems frightened. Sometimes, a word of support, an attentive ear, can be what that person needs to find courage. I found my purpose in helping other women out of the darkness that once swallowed me. I found my peace in watching my daughter flourish despite everything. I found my joy in the simplicity of ordinary days, without fear, without secrets. And now, before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask a special little favor. If this story touched your heart, if you found some strength or inspiration in my words, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell so we can continue this conversation in other videos. This subscription is important not just for the number, but because it means we're building a support network, a community of people who care. Also, leave a comment with the word courage. It's a way of saying that you watched until the end, that you care about stories like mine. And this action of yours, my dear friend, can give strength to other people who are watching and perhaps needing a sign, a little push to seek help. Do this now, don't wait even one more minute. Because sometimes, a small gesture like this can be the beginning of a big change in someone's life. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. May God bless each one of you, and may our stories, however painful they may be, serve as a beacon to illuminate the path of those still lost in darkness.